On the night of November 22nd, 1910, a private train car was waiting at a station in Hoboken, New Jersey. The shades were drawn. 6 men boarded the train one by one. They were instructed to come alone. They were told not to speak to reporters. They were even told not to use their last names. If anyone asked, they were just a group of wealthy gentlemen going on a duck hunting trip to a private island off the coast of Georgia. But they weren't there to hunt ducks. These 6 men represented the empires of J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and the Rothschilds. Together, they controlled an estimated 25% of the world's entire wealth. They locked themselves in a clubhouse on Jekyll Island for 9 days. They sat around a table and wrote a document that would change the history of the world. When they returned to New York, they denied the meeting ever happened. It remained a secret for decades. What did they write on that island? They wrote the legislation that created the Federal Reserve. This is the story of how a group of bankers secretly took over the money supply of the United States, and why the dollar in your pocket hasn't been real money since 1913. To understand why this meeting was so dangerous, you have to know who was on that train. These weren't politicians. They were the competition. Imagine if the CEO of Apple, the CEO of Google, and the CEO of Amazon secretly met on a private island to write the laws that regulate the internet. That is exactly what happened, but with money. The duck hunters included Nelson Aldrich, a powerful senator, and John D. Rockefeller's father-in-law, Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank representing the Rockefellers, Henry Davison, senior partner at J.P. Morgan Company, Paul Warburg, a German banker representing the Rothschild dynasty in Europe. They had a problem. In the early 1900s, the American public hated banks. They didn't trust them. The bankers knew that if they wanted to control the money supply, that they couldn't just open a central bank, the people would revolt. So, Paul Warburg, the mastermind of the group, told them, "We need to create a central bank, but we cannot call it a central bank. We must call it a reserve system, and we must make it look like a government agency, even though we will control it." They designed a system that was brilliant in its deception. It would be federal in name, but private in ownership. Why did they need to hide? Because 3 years earlier, they had terrified the country. In 1907, the U.S. economy collapsed. It was called the Panic of 1907. Stock market fell 50%. Banks across the country ran out of cash. People lost their life savings overnight. But here's the part the history books often gloss over. J.P. Morgan started it. Or at least he fueled it. Rumors circulated that the Knickerbocker Trust Company, a major competitor to the Morgan banks, was insolvent. These rumors triggered a bank run. When the dust settled, the competition was destroyed, and J.P. Morgan swept in to save the economy by personally bailing out the banks. He was hailed as a hero, but the public also realized something terrifying. One man held the fate of the entire American economy in his hands. Politicians screamed, "We cannot let a private banker have this much power. We need a government system to protect us." This was exactly what the bankers wanted. They knew the public would never accept a central bank owned by Wall Street. But if they could disguise it as a government safety net designed to stop the bad bankers, people would vote for it. So, on Jekyll Island, they didn't write a law to check their own power. They wrote a law to legalize it. Paul Warburg, the mastermind, told the group, "We must not call it a central bank. We will call it the Federal Reserve System. We will split it into 12 regional branches so it looks like it is decentralized and democratic. But in reality, the New York branch will control everything." They had the plan. Now, they just needed to get it past Congress without anyone reading the fine print. The bankers had the plan, but they had a massive PR problem. The plan was written by Nelson Aldrich, a Republican senator known for being close to the banks. If he proposed it, the public would immediately smell a rat. Democrats, who were the party of the common man back then, would vote it down. So the bankers executed one of the greatest political pivots in history. Step 1, the decoy Senator Aldrich introduced the Aldrich Plan in Congress. As expected, the Democrats attacked it. They called it a Wall Street bailout. They tore it to shreds. The plan died. The public cheered, thinking they had won. Step 2, the switch. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, won the presidency. The Democrats took control of Congress. Suddenly, a new bill appeared. It was called the Federal Reserve Act. It was introduced by Democrats, and they claimed it was completely different from the evil Aldrich plan. They said it would curb the power of Wall Street. But in private, Paul Warburg admitted the truth. It is the Aldrich plan in disguise. They had simply changed the names. Central Bank became Federal Reserve. Regional branches were added to make it look decentralized, but the core mechanics, private control of the money supply, were identical. Step 3, the Christmas Eve heist. Even with the disguise, they knew many congressmen would still oppose it, so they used the calendar as a weapon. They waited until December 1913. Most of Congress had already gone home for the Christmas holidays. The opposition was literally not in the room. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, they pushed the vote through the empty chambers, and President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law that same day. With the stroke of a pen, the power to print money was transferred from the U.S. government to a private board of bankers. Years later, Wilson arguably realized what he had done. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world. A government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. But by then it was too late, the creature had been born. So how does this creature actually work? Most people think the government just turns on a printing press when it needs money. If only it were that honest. The reality is a complex sleight of hand designed to hide a terrifying truth. All money is debt. Here is the step-by-step process of how a dollar is born, a process that was solidified after the Jekyll Island meeting. The government needs money. Congress spends more than it collects in taxes, which is always. To cover the difference, the Treasury prints a piece of paper called a Treasury bond. This is essentially a fancy IOU. It says, I promise to pay you back with interest. The swap, the government gives these bonds to the Federal Reserve. In exchange, the Federal Reserve writes a check to the U.S. government. But here is the magic trick. There is no money in the account. And the Fed doesn't have billions of dollars sitting in a vault. When they write that check, they are simply typing numbers into a computer. The creation. The moment the government deposits that fake check, money is created. It didn't exist seconds before. This sounds like a scam, but it is the foundation of our entire economy. The government effectively mortgaged the future labor of American citizens to a private bank in exchange for instant cash. But the real trap is the math. The government has to pay back those bonds plus interest. But where does the money to pay the interest come from? It doesn't exist yet. The only way to pay the interest is to borrow more and print more. It is a mathematical impossibility to ever pay off the national debt under the system. We are running on a hamster wheel designed by bankers, where the faster we run, the deeper in debt we fall. Once you understand that money is debt, you realize why your groceries get more expensive every year. It's not an accident. It's a feature of the system. The bankers at Jekyll Island knew that if they taxed you directly, if they came to your door and took 2% of your savings every year, you would riot. So they designed a system to tax you indirectly. It works like watering down a soup. Imagine you have a pot of soup that feeds 10 people. If you pour a gallon of water into it, you have more soup, but it has less flavor. The Federal Reserve does the same thing with money. Every time they print billions of dollars to bail out a bank or fund a war, they are pouring water into the pot. You still have the same number of dollars in your bank account, but each dollar buys less soup. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the US dollar has lost roughly 97% of its purchasing power. A dollar in 1913 could buy you 10 loaves of bread. Today, it can't even buy a pack of gum. That lost value didn't disappear. It was transferred to the people who got the new money first, the banks and the government. It is the greatest hidden tax in human history. You might be asking, if this system is so bad, why didn't it crash immediately? Because at first it felt like a party. This brings us back to the Roaring '20s and the crash of 1929. The two events are connected by a secret friendship. In the 1920s, the head of the New York Federal Reserve was a man named Benjamin Strong. His best friend was Montague Norman, the head of the Bank of England. England was in trouble. They owed massive war debts. Norman asked Strong for a favor: keep American interest rates low, make it cheap to borrow dollars so money flows into our banks. Strong agreed. He famously said he would give the stock market a little coup de whiskey. He flooded the U.S. economy with cheap printed money. This is what made the Roaring '20s roar. This is what allowed the shoeshine boys to buy stocks on margin. This is what built the bubble. The Federal Reserve didn't prevent the Great Depression, they caused it. They got the whole country drunk on cheap credit. And then, in 1929, they took the whiskey away. When the crash happened, the very people who created the problem, the big banks, were the ones who ended up owning the wreckage. We still live in the world built on Jekyll Island. The names change, but the game remains the same. In 2008, the Fed printed trillions to save the banks. In 2020, they printed trillions to save the government. Every time they print, the gap between the rich, who own assets, and the poor, who own dollars, gets wider. It is the engine of inequality. Rockefeller and Morgan didn't just win the game of capitalism, they bought the referee. The Federal Reserve was supposed to stabilize the economy. Since it was created, we have had the Great Depression, the stagflation of the 70s, the dot-com bubble, and the 2008 financial crisis. If you hired a bodyguard to protect you and you got beaten up 4 times, would you keep paying him? In the next episode, we are going to look at the moment the safety net finally broke. We're going to fast forward to 1971, the year the US president went on television and told the world that the dollar was no longer worth its weight in gold. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You need to understand the Nixon shock because it explains why your house costs so much today. My question for you: some people say we need the Fed to manage the economy. Others say we should end the Fed and return to hard money. Which side are you on? Let me know in the comments. Class dismissed.